What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing. The Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series will continue its conversation with you concerning the complete history of boxing. At the start of this series, I did mention to you that I would be showing images of fighters that may not necessarily be related to the man that I'm talking about, whoever it is that I'm referring to at that moment. The fighter in this image is Jackie Kid Bird. He was a junior welterweight champion. He was stopped by Tony Canzoneri. Very good fighter. We will be learning more about Jackie Kid Bird as the series goes on. On Friday night, March 21st, 1924, 25-year-old bantamweight Abe Goldstein would defeat world bantamweight champion 25-year-old Joe Lynch in 15 rounds. The contest took place at the New York Madison Square Garden, and Goldstein would become the brand new bantamweight champion of the world. He would also pick up the New York SAC bantamweight championship strap. Goldstein stood 5 foot 5 inches. He had a 64-inch reach. He had a total bout career walking into the ring that evening of 83 bouts, 12 losses, and 32 knockouts. As for Joe Lynch, he stood 5 foot 6 inches. He had a 66-inch reach. He walked into the ring that evening with a record of 97 total bouts, 30 losses, and 36 knockouts. Now, Goldstein was in the ring with fighters such as Pete Zivic, Tommy Ryan, and Pancho Villa. Joe Lynch, Chick Suggs, and Frankie Gennaro. He was even in the ring with a fighter by the name of Georgie Marks. Now, Georgie Marks was in the ring with Pancho Villa, amongst others. Now, Joe Lynch was in the ring with fighters such as Pete Serramento and Memphis Pound Moore, Midget Smith, Joe Berman, and Pete Herman. Pete Herman was from Louisiana. Very good fighter. We'll learn more about him. He was a bantamweight champion. We'll talk about him as the series moves forward. Monday, March 24th, world middleweight champion, Pittsburgh Windmill, 29-year-old Harry Greb would stop 30-year-old Fave Kaiser in 12 rounds. The contest took place at the Baltimore, Maryland 104th Regiment Armory. The referee was Benny Franklin. The contest was scheduled for 15 rounds. Harry Greb stood 5 foot 8 inches. He had a 71-inch reach. He walked into the ring with a record of 217 wins, 14 losses, 16 draws, and 36 knockouts. He was in the ring with Faye Kaiser 9 times. Faye Kaiser, who was he? His name was Faye Walter Kaiser. He fought from 1914 to 1928. He had a total bout career of 46 bouts, 22 wins, 18 losses, and 10 knockouts. He was born October 17, 1893 in Greenwich, Ohio. He would die September 2, 1971 in Cumberland, Maryland. He stood 5 foot 10 and a half inches. He was a middleweight and had a very good boxing career. He was 77 years of age at the time of his death. He stood 5 foot 10 and a half inches, had a record of 29 wins, 23 losses, 8 draws, and 10 knockouts. He was in the ring with fighters such as Jimmy Slattery, Young Stribling, Jeff Smith, Gene Tunney, Bob Martin, Leo Florian Hook, and Tommy Loughran, just to name a few. Now, Greb didn't weigh in because he demanded Al Ross as a referee. The commissioner chose Charlie Short, and Kaiser weighed in weighing 160 pounds. March 31st, 1924, world light heavyweight champion Mike McTeague remains champion after a controversial victory decision, according to Newark's News. Lawrence Stribling had won this fight. Referee was Harry Urto. Now, it's said that Mike McTeague came into the ring at gunpoint. He didn't even want to fight that evening. He claimed he had a broken hand. The referee was Harry Urto, and he would not change his decision for fear of his life. May 30th, 1924, world flyweight champion Filipinos Pancho Villa defeat Frankie Ash after a world-class 15-round boxing lesson in Brooklyn, New York, at the Henderson Bowl. And he would remain the world flyweight champion. Now, Frankie Ash was born June 27, 1898 in Plymouth. He died May 2nd, 1973. He was 74 years of age at the time of his death. And he would die in Plymouth as well. He was a flyweight. And he could really box really well. His issue was he didn't have the experience to handle a fighter such as Pancho Villa. Now, he had a total bout career of 140 bouts, 80 wins, 42 losses, 15 knockouts. He was stopped 9 times. Fought from 1914 to 1933. He was in the ring with fighters such as Kid Francis and Panama Al Brown, as well as Corporate Izzy Swartz and Johnny Buff. All champions once in their career. Monday, June 2nd, 1924. World welterweight champion 22-year-old Mickey Walker would defeat Philadelphia's lightweight southpaw 25-year-old Lou Tendler. Lou Tendler at one point in time in his career was known to be the greatest southpaw of all times. The contest took place at Philadelphia Park, Shrine Park to be exact. It was a 10-round affair. And Mickey Walker would remain the world welterweight champion. Now, Mickey Walker was 22 years old. He stood 5'7", and he had a 67-inch reach. He walked into the ring that evening with a total bout career of 64 bouts, 12 losses, 2 draws, and 29 knockouts. Now, he was in the ring with fighters such as Wildcat Nelson. Fought him February 15, 1924. As for Lou Tendler, he was 25-year-old. He stood 5'6", had a 70-inch reach. Had a total bout career walking into that evening, 119 total bouts, 10 losses, 5 draws, and 27 knockouts. He TKO'd Pinky Mitchell February 18, 1924. 1922, Pinky Mitchell would become the first junior welterweight champion in boxing history. Very good fighter was Pinky Mitchell. June 20th, 1924, Steve Kid Sullivan defeats world junior lightweight champion, the Scotchwop Johnny Dundee in 10 rounds, and wins the crown at the Henderson Bowl in Brooklyn, New York. The referee was Jack O'Sullivan. He would award Kid Sullivan the world junior lightweight champion. Now, other national sports was the alliances. It was a card that funded all the proceeds to privileged kids. June 9th, 1924, Sammy Mendel, Johnny Dundee, was a very good fight as well. And these men would fight some of the greatest fighters in their era. Thursday, June 26, 1924, world middleweight champion, 30-year-old Harry Greb, defeats 23-year-old Ted Moore in 15 rounds. The contest took place in the Bronx, New York's Yankee Stadium, and he would remain the world middleweight champion. The referee, Eddie Perkley, would award Harry Greb the contest. George Kelly and Tommy Shortell were the judges. Greb stood 5'8", had a 71-inch reach. He walked into the ring that evening with a record of 222 wins, 15 losses, 16 draws, and 39 KOs. As for Moore, he stood 5'10", had a record of 50 wins, 8 losses, 2 draws, and 20 knockouts. Now, Harry Greb fought fighters such as Martin Berkey, Powell Reed, Kid Norfolk, and Faye Kaiser. Now, as for Ted Moore, he was in the ring with fighters such as Jamaica Kid. Fought him May 17, 1924. Dave Shade, February 1st, 1924. Larry Estridge, January 19th, 1924. I had the pleasure of meeting Larry Estridge. He always reminded me of a Marvin Hagler. He was the same height as Marvin Hagler, bald head, southpaw, and he was the colored middleweight champion of the world. He would take that title, defeating Panama Joe Gans. One more quick thing of Larry Estridge. He lived in the Bronx, New York. I had the pleasure of meeting him about 2 or 3 separate occasions. And the colored middleweight champion would end, that line would end when Theodore Tiger Flowers would defeat Harry Greb in 1926, New York's Madison Square Garden. Once Mickey Walker defeated Theodore Tiger Flowers, then the colored division would regain itself. They wouldn't have the colored division when a black fighter had that title in that same weight division. They wouldn't have that. So that's basically what happened as far as Larry Edge is concerned. But he didn't lose his title in the ring. It was removed once Theodore Tiger Flowers became the middleweight champion of the world. June 26, 1924, America's light heavyweight champion Gene Tunney knocks out Emilio Espada 7 rounds in New York's Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. The referee was Eddie Perkey, and the judges were George Kelly and Tommy Shurtell. Now, Emilio Espada, He fought from 1919 to 1934. He had a record of 56 total bouts, 43 wins, 10 losses, and 31 knockouts. He was born July 7th, 1897 in Italy, and he died August 14th, 1971. Now, in Italy as well. The thing with Emilio Spada, I showed you a scrapbook yesterday when he had faced Luis Angel Firpo. A very good fighter this man was. He was a very, very good fighter. But they brought him from Italy. He was a big fighter, not as tall as Primo Carnera, but the mob basically got the money they needed in fighting him. So I did show you a little bit of him yesterday in the scrapbook. Now, he was born July 7th, 1897 in Italy, as we said. He stood 6'1". He was a heavyweight. He lost to Vittorio Campolo, Argentina. Campolo was 6'9", and he had an 80-inch reach. He was another big man. He had quite a few big men during that time. The Primo Carneras, the Vittorio Campolos, Emilio Spada, and a few others. Now, Paulino Escandon. He was in the ring with him as well. Luis Angel Firpo. All tour fighters. July 24th, 1924, America's light heavyweight champion, 27-year-old Gene Tunney knocks out 30-year-old Orchard man George Compartier in 15 rounds in New York's Polo Grounds. In front of 30,000 exciting spectators, Compartier was dropped by Gene Tunney in the 10th round 3 times. Tunney stood 6 foot. He had a 76-inch reach. George Compartier stood 5 foot 11 inches and had a 73-inch reach. George Compartier would face Jack Dempsey in 1921. It would be the first $1 million gate. And Jack Dempsey would knock out George Compartier in 4 rounds. George Compartier fought in the heavyweight division. He won several titles in Europe. But he would become the light heavyweight champion of the world. And he would lose his title to Battling Siki. Siki would become the first black light heavyweight champion in boxing history. August 11th, 1924, world lightweight champion ghetto wizard Benny Leonard has his hands full in the 10th round. It was a no-decision contest against Powell Morgan. Benny Leonard remains champion of the world. September 11th, 1924, the colored heavyweight champion Harry Wells, who was 32 years old. He dominates 29-year-old Argentinian's Luis Angel Firpo. I actually showed you that fight in the scrapbook in the previous video. And Harry Wells had a record of 82 wins, 7 losses, 7 draws, and 50 knockouts. It was a 12-round no-decision match, and Harry Wells would be given that victory, but it was a no-decision contest. Very weird circumstances. He dropped Luis Angel Firpo at least 2 times, and that's what happened to him. Contest took place in Jersey City, New Jersey, at Boyle's 30 Acres. The referee was Danny Sullivan, and contest lasted 12 rounds. Now, Luis Angel Firpo, he had 28 wins, 3 losses, no draws, and 24 knockouts. He was known as the Wild Bull of the Andes. He was called the Wild Panther as well. He was born October 11th, 1894 in Buenos Aires. He died August 7th, 1960. He was 65 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Buenos Aires. He stood 6 foot 2.5 as heavyweight, had a 79-inch reach, fought from 1917 to 1936, had a total bout career of 36 bouts, 31 wins, 4 losses, 26 knockouts, and he was stopped no times up until that point. Now, Harry Wells was 32 years old. He stood 6 foot 2 inches, had an 84-inch reach. Luis Angel Firpo was, I think he was 29 years old. He stood 6 foot 2.5 and had a 79-inch reach. I believe he was 29 years old. I'm speaking at the top of the head when I do these videos, so if I stumble for one quick second, I'm gathering my thoughts as I consistently talk to you. Now, September 17th, 1924, America's light heavyweight champion Gene Tunney remains champion in 10 rounds with a no-decision contest with Pittsburgh's Harry Greb. They fought at the Olympic Arena in Brooklyn, New York. The referee was Matt Hickle, and he had plans to call the fight a draw. Majority newspapers had Greb winning the fight. Cleveland newspapers. It was very controversial, and they fought 5 times. The first bout in 1922, Harry Greb would become the America's light heavyweight champion when he would butcher up Gene Tunney. October 1st, 1924, world welterweight champion Toy Bulldog Mickey Walker of Elizabeth, New Jersey, knocks out Bobby Barrett in 6 rounds. The contest took place at the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Shire Park. Very good park, had some great fights while it was up and running. He would remain the world welterweight champion, 1 minute and 33 seconds in the 6th round. Now, Bobby Barrett, Robert Frank Barrett, he fought from 1920 to 1931. He had a total bout career of 65 bouts, 29 wins, 33 losses, and 20 knockouts with 17 controversial. Basically stopped, that many times. He was born September 30th, 1901 in Chelsea, London, United Kingdom. He died December 7th, 1972. He was 71 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was a southpaw. He lost to Walcott Langford and Jack McVeigh. Jack McVeigh was known as Julius Williams. He would become the colored middleweight champion, losing that title in 29 to the Harry Smith. His name was the Harlem Thunderbolt. Jack McVeigh was going to get a title shot from Harry Greb, but Greb was told by the authorities, if you fight this man, you will be arrested. That contest was on Independence Day, and the establishment felt that would be an insult to injury if Harry Greb lost the fight to Jack McVeigh, who was a black fighter. Now, November 26th, Scotland's middleweight Tommy Milliken defeats British middleweight champion Ted Kid Lewis in 20 rounds. Now, this was a very interesting fight. British welterweight champion, the EBU European welterweight champion, the British Commonwealth Empire welterweight champion, the British Boxing Board of Control British welterweight title. December 3rd, 1924. The contest took place at the Australian Hall at Edinburgh in Scotland, United Kingdom. Now, Tommy Milliken was born March 2nd, 1904 in Wishaw, Scotland. He died December 17th, 1970 in Wishaw, Scotland. He stood 5'7". He was a welterweight and fought from 1921 to 1928. He had a total bout career of 54 bouts, 44 wins, 9 losses, 22 knockouts. And he was stopped 3 times with 1 draw. He was in the ring with fighters such as Ted Kid Lewis and Mickey Walker, Maxie Rosenblum, Ted Moore, and Jack Zivick twice. December 18th, bantamweight star Eddie Cannonball Martin slugs his way to a victory over Abe Goldstein and becomes the world bantamweight champion in 15 rounds. The contest took place in New York's Madison Square Garden, and he would become champion. The referee was Tommy Shergin. New York SAC World Bantamweight Championship title was on the line. Now, Eddie Cannonball Martin, he was born February 26, 1903 in Brooklyn, New York. He died August 27, 1966. He was 63 years of age. At the time of his death, he would be laid to rest in Brooklyn, New York. He's 5'3", had a 65-inch reach. He was a bantamweight and fought from 1921 to 1932. He had a total bout career of 98 bouts, 81 wins, 12 losses, and 29 knockouts. He was stopped 3 times. He was in the ring with fighters such as Davey Abdad, Todd Morgan, Dominique Patrol, Charlie Phil Rosenberg, Eduardo Victorio Martina. I don't know how I remember all this stuff, but that's the passion I have for the game of boxing. Now, January 2nd, 1925, featherweight Lewis Kid Kaplan, very hard puncher. He knocks out Danny Kramer in the 9th round with a deadly check left hook in New York. And he becomes the new featherweight champion that was vacated. The crown was left behind by Johnny Dundee, who was the Scotch Wop. I have Johnny Dundee ranked number 9, along with Tony Canzaneri and Benny Leonard, consecutively. All 3 of those fighters ranked number 9 in my top 10. January 15th, 1925, world lightweight champion retires at the age of 28. The undefeated ghetto wizard, Benny Leonard, leaves the ring after suffering from a hand injury. This happened in 1925. And eventually, Benny Leonard would return to the ring because the 1929 stock market would crash, and Benny Leonard was reported to losing $500,000. He would have 19 contests when he returned to the ring. And in 1932, he would take on the babyface assassin Jimmy McLaurin. And he would be stopped in 6 rounds. Now, I spoke to Jimmy McLaurin, and he told me about that contest. He said Benny Leonard could really punch, and he was still quick with his feet, very fast with his hands, but you can see he slowed down a bit by the time McLaurin got to him. Jimmy McLaurin had ended the career of Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa had his tooth removed before the fight. I don't know if it was a day before the fight or so. And what happened was Jim McLaurin hit him in the mouth, and the blood got caught in his throat. He wound up getting an infection, and he would die, the following day. So Jim McLaurin has a lot of stories. He has a very short career, but he fought, so many Hall of Famers, so many great fighters. And I have so much respect for Jim McLaurin. He spoke to me for hours, and he gave me a lot of his time, and he told me a lot of jewels, a lot of things that happened during his time, how the life was during his time. They had to eat tripe, bowls of soup. It was during the Depression, and the men were hungry during that time. Now, Benny Leonard had died in 1947. It was at the St. Nicholas Arena. St. Nicholas Arena used to be an ice skating palace. It was across the street from the Lincoln Center in Manhattan on 66th Street. They closed that arena down, but you had a lot of great fighters in St. Nicholas Arena. Now, Now, Benny Leonard retired due to hand injury. He had broken his hand when he was in a bout with Lou Tendler from Philadelphia. And that's when he said, you know what, enough is enough. That was before he would retire and make a comeback. He took care of his family and he invested in the New York stock market. Unfortunately for him, it crashed, and that's where his money went. Now, I mentioned to you he died in the St. Nicholas Arena as a referee. It was his 6th bout refereeing, and his heart had enough. He would suffer a heart attack and he would pass out there, but he would officially die, I believe, the following day in the hospital. March 20th, 1925, Jewish star, 22-year-old young Charlie Phil Rosenberg. He defeats world bantamweight champion, 22-year-old Eddie Cannonball Martin in 15 rounds. Now, Charlie Phil Rosenberg had a record of 23 wins, 15 losses, 7 decisions. No, he had seven draws, I believe it was, and 4 knockouts. That's what happens when you go at the top of the head. Bantamweight king Eddie Cannonball Martin had 15. He won 15 rounds in that contest. He had a record of 63 wins, 4 losses, 2 draws, and 22 knockouts. They fought in New York's Madison Square Garden. The referee was Pasty Hadley, and he awards Rosenberg the crown. It was the New York Sack. Charlie Phil Rosenberg, he was born August 15th, 1902, and he died March 15th, 1976. He stood 5'4" He was a bantamweight and fought from 1921 to 1929. He had a total bout career of 60 bouts, 33 wins, 18 losses, and 7 knockouts. He was in the ring with Bushy Graham and Pete Serramento. Now, Pete Serramento was a very good Filipino fighter. I showed you him in one of the scrapbooks. Bushy Graham was from Utah. He fought in the AEF, America's Expeditionary Forces, and he was in the ring with Leo Patterson, who was a black lightweight, and he would win that title in the America's Expeditionary Forces. And like I said, you had Fighting Bob Martin, you had Faye Kaiser, you had Gene Tunney in that tournament as well. Now, Charlie Phil Rosenberg was in the ring with fighters such as Georgie Mack. You heard me mention him many times. Johnny Dundee, the Scotch Wop, P.D. Mack, Joey Sengar. A very good fighter was Charlie Phil Rosenberg. I'll show you him if I pull out that scrapbook. If I don't do it in this video, I'll do it in the next video. March 27th, 1925, America's light heavyweight champion Gene Tunney and world middleweight champion Harry Greb would meet for the 5th and final time, St. Paul, Minnesota. And the results, a 10-round no decision contest. Both men remained champion because at that time, Harry Greb was the world middleweight champion and Gene Tunney was the America's light heavyweight champion. He wasn't the world champion yet, not until 26 in Philadelphia when he would take on Jack Dempsey. Gene Tunney was a poet. He read a lot of literature. He used to wear cardigan sweaters, well-dressed young man. And he knew, George Bernard Shaw, and he spoke very elegant. You wouldn't know he was a fighter. And that's what kind of peeved a lot of people, and it peeved him as well. Why? Because Jack Dempsey was known to be a slacker, a draft dodger, and Gene Tunney was a bona fide military man. So when Jack Dempsey was getting all the praises, Gene Tunney resented that. And he resented that for a long time because he wasn't recognized as highly as a prominent figure as Jack Dempsey was, but yet he fought for the country. It's a very, very complex situation, but that's what happened with Gene Tunney. I'll talk about two more bouts, maybe three. April 1st, 1925, junior lightweight Philadelphia Mike Ballerino. Mike Ballerino from Philadelphia was a very, very good fighter. He fought at Shrine Park, most of the arenas in Philadelphia at that time. But he was a dynamic fighter, Mike Ballerino. He would defeat Steve Kid Sullivan. And Steve Kid Sullivan was a pretty decent fighter. He would become the world junior lightweight champion. Mike Ballerino was born April 10th, 1901 in Asbury Park. He died April 4th. He was 63 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Bayonne, New Jersey. He stood 5'4" as lightweight, had over 80 fights with 33 knockouts. He was in the ring with fighters such as Joe Click, Al Foreman, Mike Dundee, Benny Bass, King Tut, and Tommy Grogan. He was also in the ring with Pete Sarmiento and Pancho Villa, Vincent Pepper Martin, Allentown, Johnny, what was his last name? Oh, man. I forget his last name now. I know his name was Allentown Johnny. I believe it was Leonard. Allentown Johnny Leonard. He was a good club fighter as well. So, Mike Ballerino and Eddie Cannonball Martin, these two had some good fights as well. May 1st, 1925, world flyweight champion Pancho Villa would defend his crown against a man who he won it from, Little Jimmy Wild. And he would defeat him in 15 rounds. It was in his hometown in the Philippines. Now, what's interesting about him, he defeated Cleverencio. Cleverencio Ignacio Mondes. He was born January 1st, 1905 in Philippines. He died April 20th, 1926. He was 21 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in California. He stood 5'2". He was a super flyweight, fought from 1924 to 1926. He had total bouts of 17 contests, 11 wins, 4 losses, and 3 knockouts. He was in the ring with Corporal Izzy Swartz and Teddy Silva. Fidel LaBarber and Kid Marnie. He won the vacant Oriental Bantamweight Championship contest. He was also in the ring with Charles Butt Taylor and Pancho Villa. Very good fighter. And I'll probably end this video. In fact, let me talk about one more fight and we'll end this video. Saturday, May 20th, 1925, 24-year-old Paul Billenbach had a record of 32 fights. He had 25 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws, and 23 knockouts. He defeated Mike Mateague, and he had 90 total bouts, 27 losses, 9 draws, and 42 knockouts. It was a 15-round contest. He would become the light heavyweight champion at New York's Yankee Stadium. It was a milk fun. The referee was Eddie Purley. And it makes the final decision because you had 2 judges. On the card, you had Jack Delaney and Jimmy Slattery. Now, Paul Billenbach, he was known as the Astoria Assassin. He was born February 18th, 1901, Queens, New York. He died September 30th, 1923 in Queens as well. He was a young man who stood 5'10". He was a light heavyweight, had a 72-inch reach, fought from 1923 to 1933, 10-year span. He had a total bout career of 53 bouts, 40 wins, 8 losses, and 34 knockouts. He was in the ring with Jack Delaney, Mickey Walker, and Larry Estridge. You heard me talk about Larry Estridge. He was also in the ring with a fighter from Buffalo, New York by the name of Jimmy Slattery. Now, Jimmy Slattery was in the ring with Dave Shade from California. That was an outstanding contest. But Jimmy Slattery was some fighter as well. He was also in the ring with Mike Mateague, Young Stribling, and Johnny Risco. Johnny Risco was known as the Cleveland Baker Boy. You may see in record books he was also known as the Rubber Man. He was from Cleveland, Ohio. A fantastic fighter Johnny Risco was. I'll talk one more fight. June 5th, 1925, the America's light heavyweight champion Gene Tunney knocks out St. Paul's heavyweight contender Tommy Gibbons. Defeated him in 12 rounds at New York's Madison Square Gardens. Tommy Gibbons went 15 rounds with and Shelby Montana with Jack Dempsey. And Jack Dempsey had collected $250,000 before the fight started. He would defeat Tommy Gibbons. Took him 15 rounds to do so, but then he would take off. He didn't even have an interview with anyone. The town went bankrupt because everyone put the money up thinking that Tommy Gibbons, who was a very good fighter, by the way, he only lost 4 to 5 bouts. He had an older brother by the name of Mike Gibbons. I have Mike Gibbons, Jeff Smith, who is the Beyond Club driver. I have Harry Greb, the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith. Have those 4 fighters in my top 10 as the greatest middleweights of all times. That's my personal ranking. I don't care what anybody else's is. That's mine, and it needs to be respected. But I do appreciate those fighters, and I have my own personal reasons as to why. Because I always look for all the little intangibles when I rate fighters and judge fighters. Now, what was interesting about this contest with Gene Tunney and Tommy Gibbons? When he faced Gibbons, that was the fight that would put him in line with Jack Dempsey. And I find that hard to understand because Harry Wills and Jack Sharkey was in line to face Jack Dempsey. The winner of those 2 men fighting was going to get the opportunity to fight Jack Dempsey. Now, here's the thing. When Gene Tunney faced Tommy Gibbons, and he would defeat Tommy Gibbons, Gene Tunney wasn't supposed to get that shot right away. What happened was Jack Sharkey was going to face the Philly Phantom, the Philly Phantom Tommy Loughran. Tommy Loughran had moved up from light heavyweight, gave up his title because Gene Tunney was going to retire in 1928. I'm going to 1928. And when Tommy Loughran faced Jack Sharkey, the Boston Gob, Jack Sharkey would defeat Tommy Loughran, and he would now become the America's heavyweight champion. And I found that to be odd because Gene Tunney was the America's light heavyweight champion. But when the Boston Gob, Jack Sharkey, would defeat Tommy Loughran, he would become the America's heavyweight champion. And that would put him in line to face Max Schmeling, 1930. And he was supposedly hit Max Schmeling with a low blow. He was disqualified. Max Schmeling would become champion. Max Schmeling would lose one of the titles, the New York Sack and the NBA other titles he had. He would lose one of them because he didn't give Jack Sharkey a return go right away. Instead, he would fight young Stribling, and he would knock him out in the last and final round. Well, in 1932, they would have a return go, Jack Sharkey and Max Schmeling, and Jack Sharkey would defeat Max Schmeling, and he would now become the heavyweight champion of the world. It was a proud moment in Boston, and those 2 men were something else, man. Max Schmeling, Jack Sharkey, you had Jack Maloney. You had so many fighters during that time. Well, I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. I've spoken enough to you. We will continue the